Hi and welcome to this video series where we'll cover the basics of computer programming using the C language. Now, to make it clear, the main objective of this video series is not to learn C per se, but to use it to learn programming in general. So we will not be covering advanced C stuff in this series. Alright, now that we've cleared that out, let's get down to business, shall we? First of all computers, regardless of what they look like, do just one thing. They process binary data. So what is binary data and what is processing? Binary data is a sequence that consists of only two values, 1 and 0. The same binary sequence can represent various things, such as numbers, text, images, audio, you name it. For example, this binary sequence, if interpreted as text, represents the text by. However, if we treat it as an integer number, it corresponds to this number. And if interpreted as a floating point number, which simply put is a number with a fractional part, it corresponds to this number. What's important to note here is that computers do not understand what a certain binary sequence represents, meaning for computers, there is no difference between, say, a number and an image. All they do is process binary sequences, but because they only have one job, they do it pretty quickly. Alright, now that we have a general idea as to what binary data is, let's talk about processing. Simply put, processing data means doing something with data. To make a computer do something with data, we need to give it an instruction that specifies the data that needs to be processed and the operation that has to be applied to the data. A set of data processing instructions is basically a computer program. And programming essentially boils down to creating a set of data processing instructions for the computer. An example of a data processing instruction would be 1 plus 2, where 1 and 2 are data, and addition is the operation. Now, before we get to programming, let me say this. On the one hand, programming is simple as it has a very small number of building blocks, which are data, operators, functions, branching, and loops. What makes programming not so simple is that there are 1,000,001 ways to arrange these building blocks to create a useful app or a cool game. So when learning programming gets tough for you, I want you to remember that the only thing computers do is they process binary data. And to make them do that, you only need to master these 5 elements: data, operators, functions, branching, and loops. And these elements are what we're going to cover in this video series. Alright, so computers process binary data by following data processing instructions that make up a computer program. The tricky part is that computers can't deal with anything except binary data, meaning the data processing instructions themselves have to be in binary as well. Code written in binary is called machine code. The problem with machine code is that it's not human-friendly. Just imagine writing a computer program that consists of zeros and ones only. To address this issue, we invented the so-called high-level programming languages such as C, Python, Java, etc. However, no matter what programming language you use, eventually the code you write using that language will have to be converted to binary for the computer to be able to execute it. The code you write using a high-level programming language is called source code, and the process of converting source code to machine code is called code translation. We're not going to talk about machine code or code translation just yet, and the main point here is that to be able to run code we write in C, we need to translate it to machine code first. The software that allows you to write, translate, and run code is called Integrated Development Environment, or IDE. There are a lot of IDEs that support C, and in this video series we will use VS Code with several extensions. So first of all, if you don't have VS Code yet, let's download it. To do that, we can Google VS Code and open the download page of the official website of VS Code. Here you choose the version that matches your operating system. I'm using a Mac, so I choose the Mac version. Now, if you're using the Mac as well, make sure to move the downloaded VS Code file to the Applications folder. Alright, now let's open VS Code to see this welcome page that we close to get it out of the way. Now, VS Code itself is not an IDE. It's a code editor, meaning as it is, it cannot run code. It only allows you to write code. To enable it to run code, we need to install an extension, which we can do by clicking this button here. The extension that we're interested in is called Code Runner, and we can look it up here in the search bar. Let's install it by pressing this Install button. Alright, next we click this button to switch to the Explorer panel, where we can connect a folder that we will use to store the code we write. So we click this Open Folder button, choose the location for the folder that will contain our code, and create a new folder, which on the Mac you can do by pressing this New Folder button. Now, the reason we create a new folder is simply to keep our code in one place and to be able to easily access it from VS Code. So I'm going to name my new folder just C, and hit Create, and then Open. agree to trust the authors of the files in the folder, which is basically myself, and we're almost set. Again, we will use this newly created folder to store our code, but the code itself has to be stored in the file. So to be able to write code, we need to create a new file in the folder that we just connected to VS Code. To do that, we move the mouse to the folder to see these 4 icons. And to create a new file, we click this one. Here, we need to name our new file. Let's name it, say, lesson 1. Now, to tell VS Code that this file will contain C code, to the name of the file, we add .c, which is the file extension for C files. And when we do that, we will see the C icon to the left of the file. Now, here is where we're going to write our code. And the first thing we need to add is this line, which you can just copy from the screen. Now, we can speed up code writing if we enable autocomplete, which we can do by installing another VS Code extension. So let's open the extensions panel and install this recommended one. And now, instead of typing out the entire thing, we can use autocomplete. Alright, now we're going to write our first runnable code in C, and for now, all I want you to do is just follow along, and later on I will explain what each line of code does. So after the include, we type int space main round brackets curly brackets, and inside the curly brackets, we type printf round brackets double quotes and a random text such as hello world, and a semicolon at the end. Lastly, we add return space 0, and a semicolon. Now, as you can probably tell, this code is supposed to print hello world. And the rest of the code, well, it doesn't produce any visible result, but it's still necessary to execute this line of code. Again, we'll go over each line of code later on, and for now, let's try running this code by opening this dropdown and choosing Run Code to get an error in the console panel. The reason we get this error is because we haven't saved the code. We will enable autosave later, and for now, I want you to know that if you see this fat dot to the right of the file name here, it means that this file contains unsaved changes, and to save those changes, we can go File, Save, to see the dot disappear. And if we try running the code again, we will see Hello World in the console, which means that our code works. Now, if we change the code, we will see the dot again, which means we need to save the file again. To make it less annoying, we can enable autosave by going File, Autosave. And now if we make changes to the code, the dot will not appear. Alright, again, the code we just wrote is stored in a file named lesson1.c. The file is stored in a folder named C, and you can see the full path to the folder here in the console. Meaning, if you open this file path, you will see the file named lesson1.c and another file named just lesson1. Now remember, before we run any C code, it has to be translated into binary, and this lesson1 file is the result of that translation, which means that this file can be executed or run by the computer, while this file that contains the code cannot be executed as it is. Alright, now that we've set up our programming environment, we can finally get back to the 5 elements of programming that I mentioned before, which are data, operators, functions, branching, and loops. We will get to those in the next video, and this is it for this one. But before you close this video, to test your grasp on the material covered in this lesson, you can take a quiz that you can find in our Patreon page, the link in the description. If you have questions or need help with the material in general, you can schedule a one-on-one meeting with me, the link is also in the description. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and turn on the bell not to miss the next video, and I'll see you then. Bye!